Just about ready to get started, everyone. Before we start the match, we just have a couple of recognitions of other awards, and then I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Brett Fulkerson Smith, in just a minute to begin the competition. I'm going to share my, Brett, are you the host? Could you enable screen sharing?
Yes.
Okay.
Did that do it?
Let's find out. Okay, yay. Okay, I hope you are all seeing the screen for the APPE Award presentation. And before the match, we're going to award the Croskery Award and the Bob Ladenson Spirit of the Ethics Bowl Award. And then after the match, we'll recognize the quarterfinalists, semifinalists, and of course, the finalists and the champion. So before we get into the awards, I just want to say a very quick note of congratulations to all of the teams for even qualifying to the IEB. We had over 100 teams, 100 schools compete across several regions. So you all did a wonderful job. And we know it wasn't your preference to be virtual again this year. So thank you. And thank you very much to all of the volunteers. We had over 100 volunteers making this happen in terms of moderating, judging, working behind the scenes, and of course, the generous support from the Association of Practical and Professional Ethics. So thank you to everybody. And now I would like to introduce the Pat Croskery Memorial Award. Pat Croskery Memorial Award, the Pat Croskery Memorial Award was created in honor of Pat Croskery, who passed away a few years ago and was a long-time APPE IEB Council chair and really was instrumental in the development and taking the Ethics Bowl to the next level that we recognize today. He was a wonderful human being, known for the way that he supported students and brought the Spirit of the Ethics Bowl into everything he did. In terms of the award, current and former students are able to nominate coaches or sponsors to be recognized as representing the values that Pat Croskery stood for as a teacher and mentor. Seeing ethics in the Ethics Bowl as more than anything about learning how to discuss complicated moral issues with those who hold different views in a way that serves to better society. And you may have seen a sneak preview here, but congratulations to Professor Colin Anthony Chen, nominated by students, the 2022 Pat Croskery Memorial Award winner. Our sincere congratulations, and you will receive some follow-up information from us about the award. Our next award is the Bob Ladenson Spirit of the Ethics Bowl Award. As I think most everyone here knows, Bob Ladenson is the founder of the Ethics Bowl. And the whole goal in Bob's mind was to develop a space where people could discuss issues from across disciplines in their personal lives and in the lives and in professional settings in a way that really fostered a spirit of collegial conversation. And so the Bob Ladenson Spirit of the Ethics Bowl Award was developed to recognize teams that most embodied that. And one of the things that makes this special is this award is voted on by the team's competitors. So students vote and nominate the students that they've seen during the weekend that best embody the qualities of civility and courtesy, while also showing an appreciation for the ideas involved in the cases under discussion. And so this year's winning team of the Spirit of the Ethics Bowl, and I believe the team is a repeat winner, so congratulations very much to Oklahoma Christian University, winner of the 2022 Bob Ladenson Spirit of the Ethics Bowl. Excellent job. We, of course, wish we could be there in person with you to give you rounds of applause and have you come up on the stage and be recognized. But you should be very proud of all that you do to represent your school. All right, with that, I'm going to get out of the way and turn things over to Brett Fulkerson Smith, our moderator for this evening's competition.
Thanks, John. Welcome, everyone, to the final match of this year's national championship. My name is Brett Fulkerson Smith, as John mentioned. I am a professor of philosophy at Harper College, just outside of Chicago. And I also have the distinct honor of being the IEB Council representative for the Upper Midwest Regional Ethics Bowl, which is the region that both of our finalists qualified through. So this is a real honor for me. We'll get to know those teams here in a minute, but first I'd like to invite our judges to introduce themselves. And I'm just going to ask the judges to unmute themselves in some kind of order. I can't see the judges the way my screen is laid out for the purposes of the live stream. So I'll leave it to you judges to introduce yourselves.
Well, I suppose someone has to start, so I'll start. My name is Daniel Wieste. I'm professor of philosophy at Clemson University, and I'm very pleased to be here.
My name is Karen Mizell. I'm professor of philosophy at Utah Valley University, and I'm also very honored to be here.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Sayetta. I'm known as Taz, which is now pop culturally relevant again, thanks to Space Jam 2. I am a former debater, and I've loved the Ethics Bowl ever since I first attended one. And I love the idea of healthy discourse. I love what it does for your academic life. I'm very happy we got to have two teams and just excellent presentations all around from all the other teams. So I'm very excited to be here.
Hi, my name is Michael Jordan. I'm the alternate judge. So my role is to step in if one of the other judges loses connectivity. So I teach philosophy at San Jose State in the Bay Area of California. And just a fun fact about Tasneem is I started coaching ethics bowl teams in 2003, and she was actually on my very first team. So I'm having one of those professor moments right now.
And I'm having a very honorable moment because I get to be with the Michael Jordan of philosophy again today.
We are all awed by his presence. So let's move on. I'm going to invite University of Chicago, one of our finalists, to introduce themselves.
I can start us off too. So hi, I'm Jenna. I'm a third year at the University of Chicago. I'm majoring in philosophy and very excited, very grateful to be here, and just also very happy to be here too. Just very excited to have a conversation. So, thank you everyone, Macalester, judges, moderators, spectators, everyone here for and my teammates too, just thank you for just being here and having this great conversation.
Hi, yeah. Sorry about that. Hi, I'm Matthew. I'm a first year at U Chicago, and I'm planning on majoring in philosophy. Also really excited to be here, really humbled, and it's been a great experience so far, and I'm sure it'll continue to be so.
I must say I'm really proud of everybody being here, Macalester, ourselves, and thank you absolutely to everybody here who is here to support us. Look, I'm a great deal nervous, but I must say, because I carry this joke across the day, there's some fun facts about me. I'm a Floridian, and I'm a Gemini. Idiosyncrasies need to be explained in light of those two things, okay? So patience with me. All right, carrying it forward.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gabe. I'm a senior at the University of Chicago. I am a philosophy major and minor in human rights. I'm from Houston, Texas, so I also have my idiosyncrasies I've been mispronouncing that the whole day. I have to say I am thrilled to be here this final, also with Macalester, who has been in the Upper Midwest with us ever since we ourselves started, and we actually have lots of not only respect but also very much admiration for your team ever since 2 years ago we went against you for the first, well, one of your teams, and I think some of you were there for the first time actually. We still remember that round. It was about housing actually. So we were very happy to be here with you.
Hi, I'm Holden. I'm a senior. I study philosophy and classics, and I just want to reiterate what all my teammates have said, that I am very honored to be here, and I'm really very excited for this conversation. Well, it's been great competing thus far, and I'm only looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say.
Hello, my name is Noah. I'm a second year here at the University of Chicago studying mathematics and physics. Just to echo what my teammates have already said, I'm extremely honored and happy to be here, and I really look forward to the conversation.
Great. I believe that's everyone on University of Chicago. Okay. At this point, I would like to invite Macalester to introduce the members of the Ethics Bowl team.
Hi, and thank you so much for everyone who's been involved with putting this event together. Also our coaches, the competitors who have worked with us to make sure our arguments are in peak shape for nationals. We'd also like to, once again, represent Upper Midwest. Yeah, so as for me, my name is Joe. I use he, him. I'm a senior history major at Macalester, and this is my 4th year in Ethics Bowl.
Hello, just to echo that, thank you to everybody for being here, and U Chicago, it's so awesome to see you here. We're super excited about this round. My name is Casey. I am a junior political science major, Russian studies minor, and this is my 3rd year doing Ethics Bowl.
Hi everyone, what an enriching and insightful championship this has been. I'm Dipakshi, she, her, hers. I am a sophomore international studies major, and this is my 1st year doing Ethics Bowl.
Yeah, I want to reiterate what a lot of people have said. Thank you to U Chicago and the judges, moderators, and of course my teammates and our coaches and assistant coaches. My name is Ethan. I'm a freshman, undeclared major. This is my 1st year in Ethics Bowl.
Hi, it's good to see all of you again. My name is Sarah Beth, she, her, hers. I am a sophomore, and I am a history and environmental studies double major. She, her, hers. I think that's it. I don't know. I'm really excited to be here. It's cool to see all of you again. I know that you didn't compete against all of us, but you competed against some of us at regionals, and it was really fun. So I'm looking forward to more fun.
Hi everyone, my name is Paul. I use he, him. I'm a senior at Macalester College, double majoring in sociology and political science. And this is my 4th year doing Ethics Bowl. And it's so great to be here with everyone. And thank you to everyone for being here and being part of this.
Great. Okay. Welcome, everyone. We're about to begin. First thing we need to do is to flip a coin. Macalester, I'm going to ask you to call the coin. You should see it. You might be able to see it there on your screen. Who's going to call from Macalester?
We have, to this point in the tournament, we have lost every single coin flip. So the stakes are high for this one. Let's go with tails.
Okay, here we go. Tails it is. Macalester, would you like to be team 1 and present first, or team 2 and present second?
We would like to be, we'll be team 2, please.
Team 2, okay. Macalester is team 2. University of Chicago is team 1. Judges, please mark that on your score sheets. University of Chicago is team 1. Macalester is team 2. I am now getting the case in question. Okay, I will put this out through chat and then read it. The question comes from case number 8. If the artifacts are safer from looters in the Museum of the Bible than they would be in their places of origin, is it more responsible to keep them or return them? Again, if the artifacts are safer from looters in the Museum of the Bible than they would be in their places of origin, is it more responsible to keep them or return them? You have 2 minutes, University of Chicago, to prepare your presentation. Time starts now. Thirty seconds remain. Okay, time is up. University of Chicago, you have 10 minutes to present your answer to the question. I will give you time notifications at 3 minutes and 1 minute remaining. How would you like those to be done?
Can we have them typed out in the chat?
In the chat? Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, University of Chicago, your 10 minutes begins now.
First of all, we'd like to thank the moderator for this excellent question and the judges for being here, as well as Macalester. We're really looking forward to this discussion. As far as the question, if the artifacts are safer from looters in the Museum of the Bible than they would be in their places of origin, we actually believe that it is more responsible to return them to their place of origin than it would be to keep them in the Museum of the Bible. The framework that we are going to be utilizing to address this case is one of virtue ethics, with a particular concern to the virtue of justice. And we'll be discussing the sort of conditions in which the artifacts arrived at the Bible Museum, and 2, more broadly, the history of colonialism, which has provided the conditions from which the artifacts might even be safer in the Bible Museum than they would be in their place of origin. We'll also be addressing some counters, but with that, I will pass it off to Gabe to discuss our framework of virtue ethics and our stakeholders.
Thank you so much, Holden. Yeah, so in this case, we're dealing with the case of the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the tablets that was stolen during the Iraq invasion and has now found its way to the CEO of Hobby Lobby and then to the Bible Museum, who then has been wondering whether to return it to Iraq originally. So in this case, we are dealing with what are stolen artifacts. And one may argue that whenever there's the kind of conditions in which the artifacts were stolen were conditions of injustice. I believe that one of my colleagues will discuss this issue. And when this kind of occurs, there is a duty to repair, usually, on the side of the wrongdoer. However, that would be an argument that would be very thin from a deontological framework. We are going to be looking at it from the point of view of virtue ethics instead. We believe that the virtue that we should be taken into account is the virtue of justice. The reason why we're picking justice instead of deontology is because we do acknowledge that there are many cases in which the wrongdoers themselves are not the ones in possession of the stolen artifacts, like because of all the different trade that takes place with the stolen artifact. Instead, we have different stakeholders and agents that are involved. Stephen Green, we have the Bible Museum, and now, as we will explain, many of us are also involved in this kind of issues. From the point of view of the virtue of justice, we believe there is the just person is the kind of person that sees the injustices in the world, and regardless of whether there's a very specific claim on them, will seek and choose to correct them, and they will find that to be the right sort of course of action. And we believe this is the right way of looking at it in this particular case. So the Bible Museum sees that there was an injustice that has to be repaired and has to be taken care of. Now, the question addresses the problem that it might not actually be safer in its original place in Iraq. However, we believe that from the point of view of justice, that also all of us are also involved in this kind of issue, because the requirements of justice also create a sort of cosmopolitan duty on us to create the conditions that would make it more feasible for the tablet to be safe in its place of origin. So with that, I will pass it off to my colleague Watson to discuss the original conditions of injustice that led to this position.
Of course, right after me, just to be very clear, Noah will be talking about the sort of self-determination issues vis-a-vis paternalism that tends to get brought to the fore. But I want to background this particular case with some of the historical injustices as they relate to colonialism. One has to raise the point that it's not entirely clear who might the looters be. It may very well be the countries of where the museums might currently be. We're talking United Kingdom, United States, the global North. One has to wonder, how in the world did they get these artifacts in the first place? The sort of colonialism that has gone back hundreds of years now has made it so that there are repairable harms that we seek to use the virtue of justice to correct. And at this current point in time, Iraq, though it has changed quite considerably since the first time the Epic of Gilgamesh was put forward. We do realize that. There are still long-standing claims that if they wanted to be made, it'd be very well worth the effort on the part of virtuous actors, at least on the part of the United States, the United Kingdom, as well as actors that exist within those states, to create the conditions that would make it possible to not only deal with the possible claims that might arise from self-determining cultures that have been wronged severely in the past and contemporarily, but that we be oriented in finding out the contours of those solutions with justice as an aim. So even though, and Gabe had mentioned this point, that the original wrongdoers may not exactly be the same ones because of trade and commerce, there would still be a pressure on us to bear the fact that the backdrop that we're dealing with against this case is colonialism, some of the deprivations, the destruction, the immense harm, the paternalism, which again, Noah will talk about, and it sort of bears on us to do something about it. Of course, I'll be moving it on to Noah, who will consider self-determination as it relates to cultures and the possible claims they could make.
Thank you, Watson. In this question, there is kind of a easy trap to fall into having to do with paternalism, because the way that the question is phrased of, considering the fact that, the artifacts are safer from looters here, should we return them or not? It kind of almost has an implied premise that it's possible, or that it ought to be that the current owners of the artifact should engage in this kind of utilitarian calculus, valuing the artifact and its existence over everything else. However, we find that this kind of thinking, this kind of surface level utilitarian calculus does not kind of get, kind of easily falls into being extremely paternalistic in controlling the future and the destiny of a very culturally significant artifact, which the culture and the group of people who it rightfully belongs to should have the right to self-determine what happens with it. And this kind of ties back into our framework of why we chose virtue ethics, is because we think virtue ethics can really emphasize this importance of self-determination and this emphasis on trying to avoid paternalism, which we think kind of gets at the heart of the issue and kind of sidesteps this possible kind of surface level utilitarian calculus that kind of misses or is blind to a fundamental issue, which is who has the fundamental right to this object and who has the and which group should be able to determine its destiny.
And so with that, we'll just go over a very brief counterpoint before we briefly conclude, is the idea that, well, no, they should not be returned. They should be kept in the Bible Museum. And there's many merits to keeping it in the Bible Museum, not just for safety, but for educational purpose, for accessibility. Oftentimes these museums where it's kept at the British Museum, the Bible Museum, and like other oftentimes Western museums, is that like they are open to the public and they are like widely broadcasted as these cultural ambassadors. However, we think that when we return these museums, it's not just merely returning artifacts to these countries, but returning them to the countries so that they can start their own museums, so that like all countries can be cultural ambassadors of their own culture and participate in what it means to educate people in our own history as countries of the world. And it's not just the Bible Museum, it's not just the British Museum that needs to be just, it's the rest of the world. Like other countries need to participate in what it means to live in a just society and what it means to educate people and be just. And so we think that the idea of education and accessibility is not a necessary conflict with our ideals of justice. We can have both when we return artifacts to the countries of origins, to have support the institutions at those countries that will help be cultural ambassadors so that those countries can participate in our idea of justice. And so that I'll pass it to Holden, who will conclude our argument.
Thank you, Jenna. Just to briefly conclude, we believe that the appropriate response regarding the artifacts in the Bible Museum is to return them to their country of origin. The framework that we have utilized is virtue ethics with particular concern to the virtue of justice. And not only is the fact that these artifacts were stolen a flagrant injustice, which produces a duty to return the artifacts, but rather we need to ask ourselves, how did it get this way in the first place? Why is this artifact in the Bible Museum in the West? And why is it that we are even asking the question of, should it stay there because it's safer? We need to be thinking about what sort of language of imperialism, about colonialism, what sort of conditions have brought this about in the first place, and make sure that we don't perpetuate that. Because such is the justification which has kept these culturally important artifacts outside of their countries of origin up to this point. So with that, thank you. We look forward to hearing your questions. And thank you for this excellent question. Exceed our time.
Great, thank you. Let me stop the timer. Okay, Macalester, you have 1 minute to prepare your commentary. Time begins now. Fifteen seconds. Okay, that's time. Macalester, you have up to 5 minutes to offer a commentary. I will give you time warnings with 3 minutes and 1 minute remaining. How would you like those to be given to you?
We would love that with hand signals, please.
Hand signals, okay. I'll do that. I'll also chat because I'm worried that with the speaker I have the speaker format. So if I'm not talking, I don't know if it will, I don't know if you can see me, but I'll do, yeah,
Go ahead and the chat then. If that's easier, we're fine with that.
Okay. I'll do both. All right, your time starts now.
Awesome. First off, thank you so much, UChicago, for that great presentation. It was really great to hear a lot of arguments that we considered and thought about being echoed here, and we largely agree with your conclusions. So what we heard from you, just to recap, you're using a virtue ethics framework to talk about justice and its value in this case, as well as your secondary considerations for things like decolonization and a prevention of a really paternalistic response to the claims of countries to their own artifacts. But we do have some questions about the practicality of this, about the implications of your framework, and just a few clarifications. So I'm going to pass it to my colleague. Right, thank you. So one of the concerns that we had was the framework of virtue ethics. So virtue ethics typically regards things as, or particular traits or characteristics as good in and of themselves. So for example, it is the wise individual or the good individual, the most virtuous individual is the one who best embodies the ideas of justice. However, in this particular case, we believe that a more strongly worded duty argument is based particularly in rectifying the wrongs of colonialism, whereas a virtue ethics framework would suggest that it ought to be the goal of countries to self-determine, sort of strive to that goal themselves. We would encourage an alternative framework that focuses on the duties of rectifying wrongs to restore these artifacts to this particular area. In essence, we're focusing on duties as opposed to goods. And for more conversation, I'm going to pass on to Sarah Beth.
Yeah, thank you so much. So you talked a lot about returning artifacts to their place of origin, which we very largely agree with. However, something that we really struggled with, which we would love to hear your answer for, is what about artifacts whose origins belong to a group of people or a culture that no longer exists? So while the Epic of Gilgamesh originated in modern day Iraq, Iraq did not exist when the tablet was created. We think this very could easily be extended to Native American tribes who have been forcibly relocated. Is the origin of an artifact tied to a place, to a culture, or to a people? And if not to a people, then why does Iraq have a claim to this artifact? Additionally, we'd like to hear a little bit more about if artifacts are culturally significant to multiple groups of people, what should be done to solve that issue? Who has the right to decide who artifacts belong to if they're completing claims to artifacts? And I'm going to pass it up to Tapakshi to talk a little bit more about this.
Thank you, Sarah Beth. And in terms of thinking about decolonization, thank you so much for bringing that up. Thinking of colonizing powers as looters, what happens if the colonizing powers consider the stolen artifact as a gift? This is what the British government is doing to the most prestigious diamond in the world, which is the Kohinoor diamond, which was looted from India during the colonial period. And now the British government is refusing to give it back because the British government calls it a gift from India. What would your framework say about that? And we would love for you to have that fleshed out.
Yeah, and this question about, potentially being seen as a gift is one of the reasons that we do prefer our decolonial duty-based framework to a virtue ethics-based framework, because virtue ethics is would be centering ourselves, centering countries in making themselves as virtuous as possible, whereas a duty-based decolonial framework centers the people who are the most impacted and centers their concerns over what should be done. We believe that the decisions should be up to the people who have this ownership, what has been taken from. We should be listening to them and understanding what is required there, when it comes to the decision of whether we should return an artifact or not.
Additionally, we also want to recognize that you do prioritize and you do care about decolonization in your argument, but we had a question about one way that might take place. If, like we mentioned, we have these colonizing powers who are contesting this claim, how do you dispute that claim? How do you make sure that the body that has been colonized and had their artifacts looted actually gets justice? How do we make sure that gets prioritized in this conversation? So just in a quick summary, we really loved your argument, but we'd like to know a little bit more about your framework, about where this obligation comes from. Do you think this is a duty or just a moral good for the parties who now contain or now hold on to these artifacts? And just a little bit more information about what do we do in different circumstances and where the area might be a little bit more murky. So again, thank you for your presentation, and we can't wait to hear your response.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, University of Chicago, you have 1 minute to prepare your reply to the commentary you just heard. Time starts now. 15 seconds. Okay, time is up. University of Chicago, you have 5 minutes to offer your reply to the commentary. Time starts now.
First off, we want to thank Macalester for those super, super excellent questions. They're very, very insightful, and it's really exciting to have that kind of conversation going. And just in the interest of time, we know there are quite a few questions that you guys asked, so we just want to kind of group them into kind of 3 categories and try to tackle all 3 of those categories. So the first category being this broad strokes of why we went with the virtue ethics framework and why not deontology instead? Why would we choose going with the good over pursuing a duty? And with that, I'll have Gabe kind of answer that kind of framework. And then the second kind of category of questions we took about is what do we do about cultures that no longer exist? This raises questions of what does it mean for to have a country of origin? Is it a place, a culture, a people? No, I'll be taking on that question. And then finally, your last 3 questions, we're going to kind of take into the practicality of how does decolonization work exactly? What if there are multiple claims to an artifact? And how do we make sense of that situation? So in terms of practically resolving this tension, Watson will be taking that issue. But with that, I'll pass it to Gabe, who will talk more about our framework.
Yeah, thank you, Jenna. So as to the framework that we chose, virtue ethics, we really appreciate those questions. These are things that we have been tackling with. And we do agree that there is an interesting question why virtue ethics and not deontology. I want to clarify what I mean by picking a virtue ethics and justice as a virtue. What I do not want to mean is that there is no duties of justice. There is duties of justice, and there's duties for every virtue. But we are sticking with justice. We do not believe, for example, that it is as if it were supererogatory, right? That it would be good if they did it, but they don't ought to. We believe that they ought to, and that is a duty of justice, and that is wrong if they do not, such that they would be acting unjustly if they did. So we're not necessarily rejecting rights or duties or claims. We're simply trying to emphasize that we need a very kind of special sensitivity to the wrongdoings that have happened in history and throughout the world. And we believe that what characterizes the just person is a sensitivity to those kind of issues, to the fact that the world is split into whenever there's an injustice, there's the wrongdoers and then there's a wronged, and that the just person needs to love justice and work to repair it anywhere in the world, regardless of whether they themselves were involved or not. We picked this one because the Bible Museum might, in bad faith, argue against this point, argue that they were not the wrongdoers themselves. However, we believe that regardless of that, they are a stakeholder in it, and they have a history with it. I'll pass it off to someone else.
Yeah, so I'm going to be addressing your question, which is a really interesting question about cultures that no longer exist, and also this question of, is the responsibility to the place, to the culture, or to the specific group of people? And we find that this is a really important question, and it actually kind of highlights why we think virtue ethics is a more pertinent or salient framework in this case than a duty or deontology-based framework, is because there are these difficult questions in those edge cases of who exactly is the duty to? What exact agents are these duties to? And so we think that because those cases are so complex and there can be so many possible ones where cultures kind of exist, are dying out, have been displaced, that we think virtue ethics is extremely important, because whenever we are evaluating those edge cases in a case-by-case basis, it's important to, when we do that, keep in mind the virtue of justice, the virtue of the principles of decolonization, of justice, and of trying to avoid paternalism, and the emphasis on self-determination, so that when we encounter those difficult edge-by-edge cases, we can see it for what it truly is in that case, instead of trying to make categorical duty-based claims that may not actually be what ends up being the best in each cases, which is why we think it's most important to emphasize these virtues and these principles over everything else, so that we can best deal with all of these very interesting and difficult edge cases.
And with that, I'll be closing out. I'll be as brief as I possibly can. Those were superb questions about the practicalities of what it means to deal with competing claims. We believe that by orienting ourselves and orienting ourselves to the British case, for example, in the case of states that try to talk about some of the rights they have to particular things, we think that justice-oriented individuals who comprise justice-oriented civil organizations, society, states, are going to see that for what that is. It's bad faith. we know what the deprivations, the harms, the destruction means for groups of people. We want to be oriented towards the sort of practical wisdom that comes with sitting down and realizing that there are exigent harms that have been done to people. They have to be repaired. In a justice-oriented people, institutions, world, we'll see to it that the institutions can at least give rise just to try and make sense of what are difficult questions and complicated issues. Thank you, Macalester. Those are superb questions. We definitely see the rest of our time.
All 8 seconds of it. Okay, so that brings us to judges Q&A. So I am going to move the judges into a breakout room so they can coordinate the question and answer period. And I'm going to give them 2 minutes once they're there. Okay, judges are apparating back into the main room. Just making sure they're back. Okay, judges will have up to 10 minutes to ask questions of University of Chicago. I will give 3 minutes and 1 minute time warnings. The judges Q&A begins now.
Are the judges back from their breakout room?
They should be. Hold on 1 second. Let me pause the timer here. Okay, they should be.
Are we ready to go, Brett?
Yes, we are. Yeah, let me start the timer. Hold on 1 second. I'll reset the timer. Time begins now.
I'd like some help understanding the duty you say is possessed by someone to make things safer in Iraq so that when they're returned, we won't have to worry about the difference in safety. I'd like to know who has that duty to provide for greater safety in Iraq. And also I'd like to hear you deal with the idea that if, say, it's a country, I don't know who it is in your thinking, we have collective responsibility being claimed, and that's a notoriously difficult notion. So I'd like you to speak to those two things if you could.
I think one of the concerns about who has this duty is not purely to isolate it to countries, because the relation between these two countries could very easily lead us into like interventionist language and perpetuate some of the problems of colonialism and imperialism. However, we think that there could be greater role for communication between museums and the role that the scholars have as well as in relation to local governments to make conditions safer. That's sort of the solution that we're envisioning, not a military sense of making things safer, but a greater sort of concern. And I believe Watson might speak a bit more to this topic.
You know, with this particular case, one of the difficulties is, to be quite frank, we're dealing with wolves. We're actually dealing with very predacious states. Let's be quite frank about what it is that we're discussing. The reason why this difficult case is as it is because states cannot be trusted, especially if a good many of them in the global north have been the purveyors of the injustice that they themselves are supposed to rectify. What sort of incentive structures might even be at the fore? Especially when it comes to the fact that duties are so high up in the air because of the sort of displacement that Team B so presently mentioned, that it doesn't make much sense for us to be talking of duties per se, especially since duties are definitely up in the air. But the sort of good effort that might come from a justice-oriented group of people, from peoples all over the place as well as the institutions, needs to be made by actors that aren't as rapacious as the institutions that perpetuated imperialism and colonialism. And so we thought we might highlight a bit more concretely what those institutions might look like amongst peoples. We have, of course, there are different NGO groups and private organizations such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. I know that, you know, definitely, I think, I'm forgetting who's mentioning this. Paul, you might in fact be the historian in this case. There are historian organizations that can make sure, while states are busy lying about whether or not India was apparently enthralling the British Queen with gifts, they can go about deliberating and doing the hard work of being oriented by justice, making claims, realizing their incentives on the part of rapacious actors, and in joining concertedly to create those conditions that might make it safer for the sort of coordination that Holden mentioned between museums. But, you know, ultimately, this is the thing we're going to have to continue to grapple with, whether it be duty-based or virtue ethics oriented. We're looking for the sort of beacon on the hill of justice where it concerns actually repairing harm. But thank you for the question. Absolutely.
I'd like to follow up. It sounds as though you're saying it would be a really good thing if somebody would do that. But we have no really clear idea who would. And it's rather important if that's your response to the question's claim that it's safer at the Museum of the Bible. You want the thing to go back to Iraq, and that's connected to the decolonialism and so on. But so far as the safety is concerned, it sounds as though you've got an aspiration, a hope, but nothing more, because in order for there to actually be something happening, somebody would have to be identified as holding the responsibility to do it, no?
I think that this is, in a sense, an aspiration, and it speaks to the sort of framework we're utilizing with virtue ethics, where we are concerned with having actors with sort of justice in their hearts. It might be the case that regardless of these sorts of efforts, it would be safer in the Bible Museum. However, we think that the sort of concerns of justice, namely that these artifacts were stolen, as well as how that contributes to colonialism and a lack of self-determination, means that safety might not be the highest good for this artifact. There's other sort of considerations.
However, even if we emphasize the aspirational quality, we do not want to overemphasize that this is an unfeasible way of looking at the issue or an approach. We believe that from the point of view of justice, there's also duties on all of us, including our governments, and on us to pressure our governments to make conditions such that this is not the case, right? So we want to establish the conditions that would make this as feasible as possible as well.
I could ask more, but the other judges need some time too.
Yes, there are less than 4 minutes remaining.
I will go next, and I'll try to make us quick, although it's not a simple answer. One of the things I'm thinking while you're talking about your case and your argument for justice as a virtue in this case is justice is many-dimensional, I think. And there are many, many stakeholders and many stories in this issue of artifacts. I live in Utah, and one of the problems here is most of the pots from southern Utah are in the museum in Chicago. No one ever sees them. So a lot of these things disappear into private markets. No one knows they're there. They can't be repatriated because it's a hidden market. What about things that are stolen? What about Egypt, where people sell artifacts legally all of the time? Do we repatriate those? And I will leave it there and ask you how you would respond to that situation.
I'll be as brief as I can. I think that this highlights why virtue ethics is the necessary framework. The actual duties, especially as it relates to different countries' laws, can be very unclear. And so we think that it requires a best effort and honestly a form of practical wisdom and skill to sort of assess where these artifacts should be. It is complicated.
Taz, you should go.
Right. So I know we focused a lot, and a lot of your presentation was about duty, and we focused a lot about correcting or compensating history. And I just really want to ask, why is the Bible College automatically imperial? Why are their actions seen as automatically a colonial action instead of somebody who's a good faith actor in preserving some very important piece of history?
We wouldn't necessarily say or try and make the claim that the college or the museum itself is being imperial, but by continuing to hold on to the object and not return it, it's kind of perpetuating and allowing the crimes of the past to be kind of continued. And this kind of idea of the responsible, museum or college kind of preserving it, again, protecting it from the looting, we really want to try and avoid kind of almost potential inherent paternalism in that framing, where it's this university or college's right, it's this, that they have the role, that it's their role to be the ones to preserve and protect it when, because of the past, because of the unjust way that it came into their possession in the past, even though they weren't the ones to steal it, like the history of the object matters. And we want to try and avoid kind of that paternalistic aspect and make sure that as much justice is enacted as possible.
But if the history of the object is important, what if there is a threat to this object, whether it's preservation or whether it's the country morally wants to destroy it, like the mummy and statues in Afghanistan? Isn't there a duty for us to preserve it and keep it at the Bible College?
If only momentarily, so that background conditions on the part of actors who are making that good faith effort can actually deal with these challenging solutions as it relates to the Taliban in Afghanistan. We really had to contend with the fact that, yes, we're going up.
Time expired. Apologies for that. Okay, at this moment, we're going to take a pause here just so the judges can make sure that everything is tidy on their score sheets. Participants, please clear your desks of any notes that you may have taken in the course of this discussion. And we are preparing to hear Macalester's presentation. I'm also going to fix the breakout room problem here. There we go. Judges, if you could give me a sign that you're all set. Are we ready to go? Okay. Taz, how about you? Okay. And Dan, are you ready to go? Okay. All right. So we are going to hear Macalester present on case 15. Case 15, is satire the best way to expose misinformation? Is satire the best way to expose misinformation? Macalester, you have 2 minutes to prepare your presentation. Time begins now. Thirty seconds. Okay, time is up. Macalester, you have up to 10 minutes to present your answer to the question. Time begins now.
First off, thank you everybody, and thank you again so much to UChicago. We're super excited to talk about case 15, Birds Aren't Real, and in particular, the question we've been posed, is satire the best way to expose misinformation? We argue that satire is not the best way to expose misinformation, but it is a good way, and it's a valuable way that we should preserve and use to try to expose the dangers of misinformation. Just to start us off, we're going to start with a recap of this case. This involves Birds Aren't Real, which is a fake manufactured conspiracy and advertising campaign, mostly launched on Instagram and on the web, that tells its followers to spread the narrative that actually the government has killed all the birds and replaced them with surveillance drones. And so the goal of this and the whole, the shtick behind this fake conspiracy is to expose the hilarity of our current misinformation age and the conspiracies that we see around the web. So first, to talk a little bit about our framework for why we think satire is valuable, but not the best way to expose misinformation, I'm going to pass it to Joe.
Right, thank you. So one of the important elements of this case, and regarding conspiracy theories in general, is we have a concern for the value of truth in a society. We believe that a lack of truth with regard to slowly accepting a steady stream of misinformation and disbelieving what you hear on a daily basis, we believe that that has a negative effect in society. It encourages nihilism. It makes people detached from the truth and seeking the truth, wanting to be informed on real information. And it also leads to a rise in misinformation. But at the same time, we want to balance that with the value of satire. We believe that satire, which we loosely define as, we can pass it to Casey for a definition of satire.
Yeah, so we're defining satire as a version of social commentary which takes aspects of reality and exaggerates them to make some sort of humorous or rhetorical point.
Right, thank you. So one of the important values of satire is that it allows us to critique the system while still allowing us to enjoy it merely as something in and of itself, as opposed to saying that something is bad. Humor is a foot in the door. It can be an important means by which to introduce this rhetoric, but we recognize that there are problems with satire, as we'll discuss, and slowly devolving the truth. So, and also misinformation writ large, more so than satire. So to continue this discussion more, I'm going to pass to Ethan.
Right, thank you, Joe. So yeah, we want to talk a little bit about the dangers of misinformation in general. And so I think there are a couple of very obvious ways in which misinformation can be harmful, chief among them being, of course, conspiracy theories. So one of the most prevalent conspiracy theory that's a very real conspiracy theory on probably a lot of our minds is QAnon conspiracy theory. And of course, this has ties to many other conspiracy theories, notably anti-Semitic ones, blood libel and such, as well as attacks on American democracy and a whole host of other issues that we don't really have time to get into here. The problem with this, of course, being that it spreads misinformation, but that it's also based upon misinformation. And the misinformation that can be involved in this, of course, results in the obfuscation of the truth, making it much more difficult to pull people out of these conspiracy theories and making it much more difficult for ordinary people to figure out what is true in the sphere of media. It can be very difficult to determine, given everything that QAnon says, what they say that's based in reality and what they say that isn't. Furthermore, it can direct people away from real accurate information about what's going on in the world. There are a lot of conspiracy theories, including this one about surveillance and government surveillance and being controlled by people. And these sorts of conspiracy theories can direct away from real conspiracies that are actually going on, as Edward Snowden revealed with all of the government surveillance that is actually being undertaken by the US government. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to my teammates.
Yeah, and so one counter argument that you could pose against our case that we've presented so far is, why do we think that satire is valuable at all? Aren't all kinds of misinformation bad no matter what? There's a lot that we've talked about so far with QAnon, like my colleague just said, where, these harms can be far reaching and they can draw our attention away from their very real complications of the world that are going on. And we would respond to this by saying that while we believe that misinformation is incredibly harmful, satire doesn't quite fall into this category. We believe that this is the case because, as part of satire, as my colleague defined it earlier, it necessitates the acknowledgement that the satire you're producing is not the truth. Satire is a means by which you can criticize aspects of reality through humor, and it is not intended to convince people that the satire itself is true. We think that this puts satire in a very different category than conspiracy theories such as QAnon, where there's a very intentional lie that is intended to convince people that their lies are actually the truth. We think that this case, specifically in the case of Birds Aren't Real, is an interesting in-between category where they have somewhat acknowledged that their conspiracy is not true, but are also not confirming or denying when other people assume it to be true. And so we would say that in this case, the conspiracy theory falls outside the realm of satire and actually falls into the realm of conspiracy theory, where they're trying to convince people in a lot of ways that this organization, this idea is actually true, especially in order to generate profit. And so I'll pass it off to Dipakshi to talk a little bit further.
Absolutely, Sarah Beth. And another question that can be asked of our argument is, aren't citizens should not be responsible for keeping up with all of this information and overload of information? To this, we want to bring in the value of democracy. A good democracy functions only when there are informed and critical citizens to keep our representatives, to keep our government accountable. So yes, citizens are not required to keep up with all information, which is why we think that we need to address misinformation. And that is why satire is not the best way of exposing misinformation. I'll pass it on to my colleague Casey to talk more.
Right, so we've outlined so far that misinformation has real tangible harms. It could lead to people not taking things seriously. It can lead to an obfuscation of the truth. And we differentiate satire, like Birds Aren't Real, from this in that it is not attempting to obscure reality. It is just attempting to put forward commentary about things in reality. But to bring it back to this question about is satire the best way to expose misinformation? We need a variety of different avenues in which to do this. And we think that particularly the satire of Birds Aren't Real could present an opportunity to open up larger conversations about surveillance. People might not be interested in reading news articles about it, but if they see this conspiracy, this fake conspiracy, and think it's kind of funny, they look into the website, they see that it's a false conspiracy, they see that it's trying to point out the flaws in our misinformation age, they might be tempted to look into it further and understand more about that.
Yeah, however, we'd also like to acknowledge that Birds Aren't Real has not been clear enough. They need to be clearer about the fact that this is not an active reality, that they are not a real conspiracy organization that is actually advocating for the fact that this is reality. They need to be more intentional about making sure that people are not misunderstanding the fact that this is not something they're trying to convince people of, but rather the fact that they are making a critique of the way that our society is completely involved in conspiracy theories. And something that we would advocate for, like we've said, instead of satire being the main way in which we are actually receiving information or tackling or exposing misinformation, is that people really do need to be getting their news from a variety of sources. People need to be actually able to distinguish between what is real, what is fake, what is misinformation. And part of that comes with further education and a strengthening of our education systems and helping people gain the skills that they need to determine what is real, what is not. And that comes with the gaining of skills like critical thinking.
One person could ask here, whose responsibility is it that there is so much misinformation out here? Whose duty is it to correct this? Is it the responsibility of satirists to not only point out these issues, but maybe to take steps to correct them? We would say that the primary obligation to correct misinformation is on those who spread it. For example, the originators of QAnon have an obligation to no longer be hiding the truth and be spreading their conspiracy. We also think that the news articles which have reported on Birds Aren't Real as being a legitimate conspiracy should take steps to rectify that as well. So although we would like to see Birds Aren't Real maybe take some steps to make things a little bit more clear, we do think that satire is a valuable way to expose misinformation and to make commentary on society. However, we don't think it is the only or the only best way to expose misinformation. We'd like to see a variety of different channels tackle this major topic just due to the many harms that come about to the obfuscation of truth and obstructions to our democracy and our functioning as a society. So with that, thank you so much for listening to us. We're super excited to hear your response.
Great, thank you very much. Let me stop the timer. Okay, University of Chicago, you have 1 minute to prepare your commentary. Time begins now. Fifteen seconds. Okay. University of Chicago, you have up to 5 minutes to offer commentary on the presentation you just heard. Time begins now.
Okay, thank you, Team Macalester. We had a lot to think about with respect to this case. We want to say first and foremost, we actually agree with a number of the solutions that you take up. There are a number of avenues that could be taken to make sure that the people who perpetuated this sort of satirist joke are bolstered, are helped in making sense of the fact that we live in a sort of post-truth era. I believe that Paul had mentioned that there was some backdrop conditions that led to the proliferation into the intensity with which misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories run rampant, namely those related to nihilism, disinformation. Our team would actually add in institutional mistrust, as well as the degradation of those institutions. The WMD lie is still a great card used by conspiracy theorists, especially since things were a bit shaky there. The CDC recently has been a little shaky as well, acting at the behest of airline industries without clear data. There are just moments in which people look at their institutions and go, okay, yeah, trust is a bit shaky here. In addition to that, economic deprivation that forces people into situations in which they are quite susceptible to making sense of the fact that they can't provide food for their families. We recognize all these conditions. And in fact, one of the things that we want to use to orient ourselves here is actually a social contract theory in which there's a concerted effort on the part of just about everybody, including satirists, including governments, civil societies, to make sure that truth as well as the institutions themselves are acting in accountable ways. So there might be mechanisms to ensure that institutions themselves are bolstered in their ability to put out the truth and not being distorted, as well as ensuring that satirists themselves don't have to bear the burden of making commentary of issues that so far go outside their realm. We think it's a bit ridiculous that satirists would be even armed with the task of even having to do this in the first place. So we use social contract. With that, we wanted to actually go into a couple of questions as it relates to the stability of the designation of satire that you all use. Matt will speak about that, as well as any other questions that we might have prepared.
Thank you, Watson. Yeah, so first of all, I really liked your presentation. As Watson said, we agreed with a lot of the points, and I really liked how you guys, the value you guys placed on satire. I know personally, I enjoy it. But I just had a quick question to further this discussion. Since humor is subjective, is it really possible to put an objective definition to satire, to different theories, since everyone perceives these differently? So for instance, I personally had no idea that birds aren't real before reading this case was satire. I thought it was a real thing, not that I believed in it. But so what happens who bears the burden if someone doesn't get the joke? I know you touched a bit upon accountability and again, who bears the burden, but maybe it's just some more clarification would be helpful for the discussion.
Yeah, thank you. I actually, this is very interesting. I just found out I might also believe that this was an actual conspiracy theory, and I did so too, which was about my question. So my question is, under what sort of moral framework do you think would be appropriate to evaluate the birds aren't real case? So you all touched upon the fact that there's a difference between conspiracy theories and the satirists and the intention that lies behind their actions. However, as like Matt and I show, we weren't really in on the fact that this was their intention until we actually read the case. And for a year and a half, I thought that this was okay. So this kind of shows that in many of these cases, the conspiracy theory, the satire, the joke can spiral out of control and have some unintended consequences that we might not be able to take into account first. So that this is just to bring out a morally salient fact about what kind of framework should we use to evaluate this case. With that, I'll pass it off to Holden to close.
I'll be brief. My question is just whether you can expand on what sort of model of education you have. We also thought education was the right sort of approach for this topic, but we were concerned about education which might lend into forms of propaganda, as well as how you can deal with this without maybe censoring people. So with that, I'll pass it off to Jenna just to briefly conclude us.
Yeah, and just to briefly conclude that we broadly agree with your argument as a whole, but our answer is kind of institutional support through a social contract theory. And so we want to ask about one, what do we do about the people who aren't in on the joke? Whose responsibility is it then to make up for when the joke falls flat? Our second question is based on the idea that what to do with a framework. What kind of framework are you guys providing to support your answer, and maybe balance that with our idea of social contract? And then finally, with the idea of explaining a little bit about how do we educate people without being patronizing or censoring. And that we'd like to conclude and thank you, and we wait for your responses.
Great, thank you. Okay, Macalester, you have 1 minute to prepare your response to that commentary. Time begins now. Fifteen seconds. Okay. Reset the timer. Macalester, you have up to 5 minutes to offer a response to the commentary. Time begins now.
Awesome. UChicago, thank you so much for that commentary and those questions. We're really grateful for the opportunity to expand our argument here. So just to recap what we heard from you, some kind of broad categories of questions. We heard an alternate framework that you all are using to evaluate this issue, social contract theory. We also are looking into the objectivity of humor, as well as our moral framework and what happens when someone isn't in on the joke and what might be the consequences of that. And if we've got time, we'll talk a little bit about education. So to start us off, I'll pass it to my colleague.
Yeah, thank you so much, Casey. And so as two of you pointed out during your presentation or during your response to our presentation, you didn't realize that it was satire. You didn't understand or realize that people didn't actually think that this was real. And our responses would be that if you look at their website, it says that it's fake, which is one of our characterizations of what makes it satire. And that's in response to your other point of humor being subjective. Can you really put a label on what's satire? We think that one of the key characteristics of satire is that it is acknowledged to be false, which we do think that Birds Aren't Real somewhat fulfills. However, the fact that some of you didn't know that birds aren't real is satire is the reason that we have advocated throughout our presentation that they need to be more clear about this. And also that the media and other people who are talking about and reporting this issue carry this obligation to clarify that it is also not real and that it is satire whenever they report on this issue. And I'll pass it off to Paul to talk more about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do think satire can be very valuable, but we also want to uphold the idea that good satire requires a clarity of purpose and a clarity of intention. It should be made clear as is reasonably possible what is being satirized and what we are making, what the joke is that is being made fun of, because without a clarity of purpose, satire can become, to too many people, the thing that is attempting to satirize, to criticize. Now, however, any kind of information, even things that are straight up accurate, truthful facts that are just being put out, are at times misinterpreted by people. And we have to recognize that even the most clear satire can't always be clear to everyone. And as you said, humor is subjective. So there is a level of clarity that people have to push for as much as is reasonable. And we think that in that case, more good than harm is done. Yeah, and I'll pass it off to Joe to speak a little bit more.
Thank you. And so that gets at what we're, to better sort of understand the framework. So when we began this case, we discussed the value of truth and free speech as a way of answering the question, is satire the best way to expose misinformation? Now that we're actually focusing in on satirists themselves, we're beginning to focus in on what duties satirists have to those who may be consuming their work. And as we have discussed, satirists have some sort of duty which derives from a more deontological framework, that they are clearly labeling the fact that this is satire, that they are not purposefully making information that is designed to deceive. Rather, it should be directed towards more humorous or rhetorical points. And we don't necessarily prefer social contract theory, because social contract theory implies a give and take. You forfeit some capacity for X in order to receive Y from some sort of protective body. And we don't necessarily, and we just believe that with our framework, there could be reciprocal duties without necessarily having to work within some sort of social contract system that may be ill-defined. We believe that reciprocal duties can just exist in a space and that they should be acted upon. I'm going to pass to Casey.
Moreover, you laid out this distinction between intention and impact, and what might be some of the harms of people not fully understanding this satire. We want to just reemphasize the point that if we can't spread satire because someone might misunderstand it, then we can't spread any information because then maybe someone might misunderstand it. So that might be one reason why we would steer away from that line of thinking and instead would focus on the great good that satire can provide to correct misinformation, to help us make sense of the world, and to help find some levity and some humor in society when things might seem so dark. So hopefully that answers your question. Just to recap, we have kind of covered our justification for our framework, as well as what happens when someone isn't in on the joke. And once again, we think that satire, while not the only way to combat misinformation, is a really valuable tool that we have in our arsenal. So thank you again for your commentary, and we're so excited for judges' questions.
Great, thank you very much. Let me stop the timer. Judges, take 1 second here to score that last category before I move you into the breakout room. Judges, once you're in the breakout room, I'll give you 2 minutes to organize your thinking and then hopefully successfully pull you back into the main room this time. Okay, we're bringing the judges back. Are judges back? Yes, here they come. Let me just check. Okay. All right, judges, you'll have up to 10 minutes to ask questions of Macalester. Time begins now.
I think I'm supposed to go first, so I'm going to do that. I wonder whether you believe that satirists have some duties as satirists, as independent from the duties they might have as mothers or fathers or brothers, sisters, whatever, or employees. Qua satirists, do they have duties? And if they do, what's the basis of that? In our little discussion, I mentioned that some satirists are clearly identified. They come on, say, The Tonight Show, and we know they're satirists and they're doing that. But apparently this was not clear to people that was what was going on. So the question again is whether they have duties as satirists.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And to answer it directly, we do believe that satirists have duties as satirists. And we believe that these duties include defining what work is satire. We believe that if they are producing works of satire, they need to define them as such. They need to tell people that this is not true. They need to tell people that this is a critique. And they need to make it known to people that it's not a version of reality that they should take at face value as this is what's real. And we think that that's their main obligation as satirists in and of themselves. And I'll pass it off to Casey to talk a little bit more.
Right. We also want to recognize that all people, whether or not they define themselves as satirists, kind of have this obligation as well to not, willfully lie to people in this way to try to distort the truth, try to get these outcomes out of people. We think that maybe an additional obligation might fall on satirists who have a large platform, who maybe are making money from the work that they're producing. They might have an additional obligation just because they have so many eyes on them and so many people who may trust them and their perspective. We think they might have an additional burden to make that clear. Oh, I think you're muted.
How might they do that? Put up a sign, wear a uniform, so that people know that they're satirists and they're doing satire?
Thank you so much for that question. So, for example, as the case points out with Birds Aren't Real, we think that one way that satirists can point it out is beside their work of satire. Or The Onion, for example, as a website who says that every work on their website is a work of satire and that anything on that website is satire. We think that that's one really clear example of how written work especially can be labeled and should be labeled by the author as satire. We think that in-person satire, maybe like a comedian, could be a different case, but people should always acknowledge maybe at the beginning of their show, for example, like, hey, just to acknowledge, like, I'm a satirist, the words that I say, please make sure that you investigate them. Do not believe that they are true. Like, the purpose of my role, the purpose of my job is that I make critiques in a way that is not actually acknowledging, like, that the words that I say are not necessarily the truth. And I think just that what we would like to see from satirists is that acknowledgement, either while they are producing their work of satire or somewhere on their satire, so that people can trace directly that the work that they produce is that satire.
Yeah, and to be clear, we believe that any form of communication needs to be done well so that it is understood what is being communicated. That is something that people should pursue when they're trying to communicate something, whether it is humor, whether it is just a factual point in an essay or an article in the news. And we don't think that satire is different from this. And we think that the fact that satire, when poorly done, can just be misinformation means that it is especially important that, like in any other communication, they make it clear what it is that they are communicating.
Thank you.
I'll go next. So this is kind of a twofold thing, right? And it touches a little bit on what you guys have talked about in your presentation and the commentary. Part of the last 2 years, we've seen so many conversations that have complete disclaimers and scientific studies and a whole bunch of other things from CDC, government officials, from doctors and organizations, and they've all made it a point to tell you what the truth is. But sometimes that hasn't been effective as much as somebody actually mocking or actually creating a funny video or a post. And that has had more effect because you see the juxtapositioning of the truth and the obvious slippery slope to what, you know, this misinformation can be. So it's been more effective. At the same time, you know, if you're to address that, you can also say, how fair is it for me to ask a, you know, 7-minute disclaimer from a satirist for a TikTok video? Like, there's no reason why anybody's gonna hang around that long to watch it. So how do you say, you know, in the light of these things, that satire is really not the best way to expose misinformation?
Yeah, I think our answer to that would be that, you know, not everybody is going to respond to that satire the same way. Not everybody is going to find that persuasive or something that will connect to them. And that's why we would just caution against, you know, using any one channel to try to communicate the truth to people. We do recognize, you know, the inherent value of satire. There are people who are going to be most captured by that style of communication, and they're going to see it as something fun and as something that they can talk about, especially in an age of information fatigue where people are just so tired of reading headlines. You know, to see a TikTok video that makes them laugh and also makes them think, we think that can be a huge asset. But like you said, we can't expect everybody to connect to that medium. That's why we would want to see, you know, a variety of different formats.
And again, there are nuances within the broad category of satire. There's a difference between Jimmy Fallon or Jay Leno or Johnny Carson or something coming out and making jokes about the news, and, you know, being, you know, conducting himself in a joking manner, or a one-off TikTok where a single joke lasts no longer than 15 seconds. One of the major concerns that we see in this case is that Birds Aren't Real is a continuous perpetuated movement. And that is one of the main distinctions that we can sort of see within this, because when you're making fun of a conspiracy theory, that's when we start to get into sort of like more of the harms that conspiracy theories can have. They're longer, they have more reach. So as those factors go up, as the audience increases, those obligations in turn increase.
However, we also don't want to diminish the reality that the reach of social media has and the large audience that a lot of these TikTokers do hold. And so we absolutely think that, as we said in response to the first judge's question, that these TikTokers, especially if they're propagating a conspiracy theory, do have an obligation to perhaps address it in the caption of their video to say, like, hey, just so you know, this is not real. We think that that's a really easy way, that maybe it's not a 7-minute disclaimer, but it is telling people, hey, like, let's pay attention to this. Make sure you know that this is a joke. And that's a pretty simple way that they can do that and be held accountable.
Judge Mizell, you're muted.
Muted. You're not going to have time to answer my question, but mine had to do with the misinformation that you spoke about and the democracy based on informed citizens. And my question had to do with what happens when people spread misinformation that they themselves believe. The Birds, the people who started the Birds Aren't Real satire or misinformation didn't believe it. But what about QAnon and some of the pandemic craziness that people believe? So what do you do with that?
Yeah, this is a really difficult issue. It's hard to think of something so pressing when we look at things with the pandemic, when we look at the lingering effects of QAnon. We would say that the biggest burden falls on those who create and propagate these stories, who reach out, try to find new platforms, new people to recruit and to try to convince of this. Particularly in the case of QAnon, you know, there's great reason to believe that a lot of the social media influencers who are pushing this, they know it's not real. They know it's a way to make a quick buck. And we think that the primary burden falls on them. However, we also think it's, to some degree, the burden of the individual to be looking into this more. We think that you should have a natural, or you should foster a curiosity in yourself and a responsibility to vet the information that you're coming in contact with before you spread it to other people. And also be looking at a variety of news sources and not just kind of focusing on what is most appealing to you.
And very, very briefly, we believe that it's also the obligation of others to try and go in and correct misinformation where they see it. and to try to find accurate information to counter conspiracy theories with.
Good job. Did we lose our moderator?
It looks like we did, yes.
Or
he's still here. He just turned off his camera.
Yeah.
So is there still time?
No, that the time has expired just now.
Just now, okay.
Yeah. Okay, I am going to give the judges a second there, and then we're going to go into the breakout room so that I can help them calculate the scores, and then we'll return with an announcement of this year's champion.
We just want to say great job, Chicago. You guys
that was
amazing as always.
Round. Good work, y'all killed it.
Thank you for representing with us, Upper Midwest.
Yeah, I'm glad. Like at the end of this, whoever it's like, it is for the Upper Midwest. No one really loses. We all just win.
We'll make most ethical region.
Exactly.
Most ethical region.
We found out. We've proven it.
Although debatable, as anything.
Yeah.
And we debated it in our region one.
We can find many counters for why the Midwest is not the most ethical.
Yeah, no coastal elitism here.
I feel like maybe you could argue the Pacific Midwest or the upper like West, because there's like 0 people there. Like the idea that like it has to be most ethical because there's fewer people.
Less populated than the coast.
There aren't any people to be unethical.
Isn't that good? Yeah, but thank you guys for like really fantastic conversation. Like really just like good points were made, you know, and we're just like it felt like an actual conversation, which is like
I agree
for like this type of competition.
Yeah, there were so many points you made where we were like, yes,
we brought it up. Yeah, we were like, okay, we hope they bring up this, we hope they bring up that, we hope they bring up this, and you like hit all of them. We're like, yes, great, awesome.
Points, yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I've sort of been thinking about those whole tournaments, just like, it really does get harder every single time. That's how a tournament works. Oh, boy.
Yeah. Also, our first coin toss win in this entire championship.
I know, it's on our coin toss.
Yeah.
That's the biggest one.
Yeah, the questions just get so much harder. Like, I was shocked.
Why was the question like, you know, how do we solve colonialism?
Yeah,
I know.
10 minutes or less.
You know.
And like, I always know race is like a real thing. I don't think race is real. Like, it's like we made that shit up.
We were just talking about how with bioethics, questions beforehand, you can take time, but here, you never know what they're going to say. You can predict it, but
yeah, the first round is such a curveball.
We're like, whoa, yeah.
And also with the national parks, the fact that it was about cities, I was like, interesting.
Whoa. I think cities.
Oh, we're being recorded in live stream, by the way.
One
Fun
of our
fact.
judges was from Moab City, actually, the town. He was there.
Just a reminder to the teams, we love your spirit. It's awesome, but just want to remind you that you are being live streamed on YouTube to many people.
Whoops. Okay.
Thank you for the reminder.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder.
It's actually kind of wonderful to see. So I didn't want to shut you up.
This is like, what was that case we literally just talked about where it's like privacy, like it was like the surveillance, like that's facial recognition, but like, yeah, that one, yeah.
I am tired. I don't know.
We've been on Zoom for like 8 hours, if you think about it.
So many hours.
Yes. Also, I am so sad that we didn't get the lawns case. I wanted to so bad.
We'll never know if lawns are good or not.
I feel like we know that they're not good. I feel like we can. I mean, unless y'all disagree.
Then we can have another round. A quick round.
We'll do Chicago, Macalester, scrimmage.
Honestly, we could do a lawn scrimmage. We could do a lawn scrimmage.
If we both agree the lawns are bad, then, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I missed this. Are there any seniors among you?
Oh, can they hear us?
Oh.
Wait, I can repeat your question, Gabe. Are any of you guys seniors? I think a couple of you were.
2 seniors.
Oh wait, we have 2 seniors too. That's crazy.
Are you feeling your last time ever?
Yeah. What a way to go out with a bang.
Oh, absolutely. Just going out in flames. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're super excited though to see you all next year too. Or most of you. Oh,
yeah,
most of you.
Most of us.
No, when you come to see them. Oh no. I've been trying not to think about.
Yeah, don't think about that.
It doesn't get easier.
Like, can they?
You have to like shout.
Yeah, because like it's my mic is I'm unmuted right now, but.
Can you speak from me? It's been hard.
Oh, you want to speak from you? Yeah, sure.
So definitely one of the things that I had to consider as a sociology major was balancing colonialism and racism. Paul, what are you studying for history? I'm sure you have some insight.
I think Sarah Beth and I are the history.
I'm also a history major. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm a
Forgive me.
sociology major, right there with you.
Yeah, kind of surprised. Are none of you like philosophy majors?
No.
That's really
I
cool.
did do like LD for a while though, so I feel like that's like most of the ethics that you need to know.
I took an ethics class my freshman year.
Yeah.
I have never taken a class on ethics or anything. I just done ethics school since high school. So.
Yeah, experience.
Okay.
Oh, ethics 101 is
Remind us who of you are philosophy majors.
Yeah, we have like I think 3.5. Matt's like a budding philosophy major.
I have no idea.
There's still time.
He's decided against it.
Coming in.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is y'all are trying to convert him to a philosophy major.
I mean, that's the beauty of the bowl. It's like like
Power persuasion.
Okay, we are back. And I am going to ask John, do you have, you want to make your announcements now?
1 second. If Brett, we're colleagues, I know you to be a witty person, so I need you to stall with some repartee for about 45 seconds while we get our fancy PowerPoint ready to go here for the big reveals.
Oh, okay. All right. So Descartes walks into a bar. He's had a bad day. Takes a drink, beer, guzzles the pint down. Bartender asks if he wants another drink. Descartes says, "I think not," and disappears. No rim shot? I told that joke to my students last week.
That's the problem with live stream. You can't hear the audience.
This is my dad's favorite joke too. So I appreciate hearing it.
Well, listen, in all honesty, and this is not just to buy time, I do want to recognize John's efforts this weekend. So, you know, we can see hand clapping and that sort of thing, but it is a monumental task to do this. It's especially difficult when you are virtual with all the contingencies there. And I also want to thank all of the judges and moderators that made the weekend possible. It is also a monumental task and we appreciate your volunteerism. And then there is a whole army of people behind the scenes who are troubleshooting and offering support to everyone. So I do also want to thank that army of volunteers. I mentioned this at the beginning of the match, but I do want to give a special applause to the teams that qualified to be here at all this weekend, and then those who made it to the elimination rounds, and of course, University of Chicago and Macalester for a very, very good match. I'd also like to thank the Academy, who supported all of my efforts to become the great actor that I am. Johnny, almost done. I don't have anybody else to thank. But we'll be ready to announce winners momentarily.
Yes, I hope that you all love the brilliance of PowerPoint, because this is going to be worth waiting for when this file eventually opens. I'll tell you what, though, at the risk of a little bit of visual anticlimax, Brett, why don't you go ahead and announce the outcome of the match itself, and then I will put the presentation up to go through all of the finalists, semifinalists, quarterfinalists. So the honor is yours, sir.
Oh, okay, great. All right, so I'm going to invite each of the judges in turn to reveal their final scores, and then I will share the moderator's report after that. So Judge 1, how did you score the match?
Great job, everyone. It's always very, very difficult to score. This year, much like last year as well, everybody throughout the matches, very close call, very great discussions. For my scores, Team 1, University of Chicago, gets 50 points, and Team 2, Macalester, 54.
Thank you. Judge 2, how did you score?
Karen, I think your mic's mute.
I also found this very difficult. Great teams. It was a pleasure to hear your arguments. My scores, Team 1, University of Chicago, 56 points, and Team 2, Macalester University, 55 points. So the win goes to Chicago for me.
Okay, great, thank you. Judge 3, how did you score the match?
Carefully.
But
the scoring sheet can be a challenge, so I did it carefully. This was a very good match. I want to say I agree with the other judges. It was difficult, but enjoyable. Both presentations, performances were very good. University of Chicago, Team 1, I gave 50 points. And Team 2, Macalester, 52 points.
Okay, so, oh, I'm trying to share over you, John.
Oh, well, it's okay because I know the answer. So it means that our winner is Macalester College. Congratulations, Macalester. Am I muted? Did I just ruin it?
No, you're fine.
Okay, good. All right, well, congratulations, Macalester. Undefeated throughout the entire day. And this was a matchup between, I believe, the top 2 teams entering into the elimination round. So truly outstanding performance. And of course, that means our finalists, well, here is the list of the team members: Ethan, Sarah, Joe, Casey, Paul, Tapakshi, and coaches Bo Larson and Nathan Vinhout Kane. And then congratulations, of course, to our finalists, runner-up University of Chicago, a student coach team. Fantastic. Gabriel, Holden, Noah, Watson, Matthew, Jenna, and Gabriel is the same Gabriel up above because he is a student coach. And now we're going to move on to our other recognees, I just said that word wrong, but want to recognize our semifinalists, Seattle University, Westminster College. Both semifinals were extraordinarily close, so very hard fought matches. So congratulations to those teams as well. And finally, of course, our quarterfinalists, University of Alaska Anchorage, Youngstown State University, University of California, San Diego, and University of Oklahoma. Excellent job to all of you. You should all be very proud. And I will tell you that the pictures you see of these trophies are pictures of the actual trophies, which are here with us today in Cincinnati. So you'll be receiving these trophies in the mail, and the champion will also get a trophy that travels with the champion, and you'll have your name added to a plaque. And thank you. My name was added against my will here, but thank you very much to the members of the National Competition Organizing Committee, Mark, Richard, Michael, Kelly, George, and Kristen, who's sitting off to my left and was just sending me this PowerPoint. I get choked up every time at this point, because it really is a tiring day, and a lot of these, we thought we'd be sitting around and telling jokes between rounds and just troubleshooting, but Mark and Michael and Kelly and George all got pushed into double and triple duty sometimes. So really amazing work. And also want to thank you to some of the other people behind the scenes. Of course, Bob Ladenson, founder of the APPE Intercollegiate Ethics Bowl, all the judge and moderators, especially the judges and moderators of the final. Thank you very much, Brett, Karen, Dan, Michael, Taz, and the various members of the APPE IEB committees, the case writers, to the rules committee, to the awards committee, diversity committee, and the regional hosts and organizers. And then of course, to all of you, the competitors, coaches, Blink Tees, and A1 trophies and Allen Awards. So with that, you can't see me, but I'm dropping the microphone. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you so much for everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Oh
you.
my God, fabulous.
I'm
Chicago.
Yeah.
We can't wait to see
Everyone,
you again.
We can't wait to see you again. Judges, thank you, moderators.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you. You guys are incredible.
Congrats, you guys. All right. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Everyone. Congratulations.
Done.
Are we still live streaming?